Hello and welcome to Top Story. A glimmer of hope in Kenya's crisis. President Mwai Kibaki has invited opposition leader Raila Odinga for their first face-to-face talks since the country's disputed presidential election. Odinga has called off nationwide protests set for today. International mediation is also gathering pace. The top US envoy for Africa has been shuttling between the two leaders, and now the chairman of the African Union, John Kufuor, is due in Nairobi. Diplomats seem optimistic about resolving the conflict that's claimed more than 600 lives since the election on December the 27th. But much will depend on Odinga's handling of the standoff. Well, to discuss that, I'm joined now by Nicholas Norbrook, the managing editor of the Africa Report. Thank you very much for being on Top Story. How hopeful is this olive branch from President Kibaki?
I think it probably is a good sign. I mean, Kenya really has gone to the brink in the way that it hasn't done. It's been an island of stability, as people have been saying over the weekend. A lot of people were quite surprised at the vehemence and the passion and the bloodletting of the last few weeks. It took a lot of people by surprise. I mean, however, the roots of this thing go back quite a long way.
And what about the chances of a coalition, of a unity government, rather? Is that a realistic prospect?
I think that's what President Kibaki was pushing. He wanted there to be a government of national unity, and that's the ODM, the Orange Democratic Movement with Raila Odinga at its head, would have some part to play in that. But essentially the shots would be called by Kibaki. Obviously, Odinga rejects this. He thinks he won the election fair and square. He thinks there was vote rigging on a massive scale. And so originally the ODM were proposing something along the lines of a Westminster-style democracy, where the party with the largest number of seats gets to be in charge and to have a strong executive prime minister and a largely ceremonial president. So Kibaki, the ceremonial president, a little bit like the Queen as a ceremonial head of state. I think what they're moving towards and what he's now proposing is a kind of transitional government, not unlike what they had in South Africa in 1994, which could last anywhere between 3 months to 2 years, and which would focus solely, obviously it would administrate the country, but it would overhaul the law courts, it would overhaul the electoral commission, and most importantly, it would put in place a new constitution for the country.
Would that put Odinga at a disadvantage, this sort of long period of reform? Surely he needs to become president now to ride the wave of sympathy for him.
The conventional thinking in these kind of situations is that the longer the incumbent can string out the status quo, the more assured he is of his continued status as the incumbent. However, Odinga is surrounded by a fairly single-minded bunch of people. You have people like Tony Gachuka, his number two, who says, democracy is hard. Bloodletting may have to be a possibility if it's to keep the pressure on the tyrant. Otherwise the dictator will simply entrench, I think was his words.
What cards can Odinga play then? Is it merely this threat of protests coming back at a later stage?
I think violence has been the boot on the windpipe of the current government, and he has called off a demonstration, which has obviously allowed some breathing space for the negotiations now, which is great. It's hard to say really, to what extent he's prepared to keep levels of violence up, because obviously it will sort of tarnish his image if he does.
And he can't play the ethnic card too much, because he has to appear as a statesman, as someone who can represent all Kenyans, not just his own tribe.
That's right. I mean, a lot of the sad ethnic manipulation, if you will, of the last week or so is an echo of what we saw in the elections in 1992 and 97 under Daniel Arap Moi, who was notorious in his ethnic manipulations. I mean, there's been lots of headlines about tribal wars in Kenya, but really, these are ethnic tensions which have been whipped up, if you like, by politicians, especially around Eldoret and in the Rift. But at the bottom of that, there are other simmering tensions which have been used.
Like land, for instance.
Land is, I think, it's the big elephant in the room which no one's talking about. And the real danger in Kenya is if in the next few years it just gets kicked into committee. They really need to focus on this now. In the 60s, there was a power grab by the Gikuyu, the now economically dominant ethnicity in Kenya, and they now own sort of huge tracts of land. The Kalenjin, to an extent, did the same in the 70s under Moi, and this will foster resentment over generations. Much as between France and Germany there was fights over Alsace-Lorraine, and no one talked about French tribes and German tribes. It's a similar kind of thing. Land is really at the heart of a lot of these disputes. Another interesting thing is the wealth disparity between the haves and the have-nots. And this is almost an election where the haves, in the form of the Gikuyu, are facing off to the have-nots. And Raila's vote has really been this kind of lumpen proletariat vote.
Just briefly, Nicholas, what chances do international mediators have now? What are the African Union's influence at this stage?
John Kufuor, the president of Ghana, who's now sort of jetting in to try and calm the things down, he's going to be more of a facilitator than a mediator. He's not the type of guy to bang heads together. He's known as the gentle giant in Ghana. But I think that's maybe what the situation needs. We don't need a headbanger. We need someone to get people to talk in a rational and cool-headed way. The African Union desperately needs a success story. It's not had much luck in Sudan. It's not having any luck in Somalia. And so if it could have, an example of a well-mediated crisis, it would do a lot to its image and, reassure a lot of people that this institution is going places.
And that's really done by a softly approach.
I think so. I think there's been too much rushes of blood to the head in the last week or so for anything else but a calm approach.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll have to stop there. Nicholas Norbrook, the managing editor of Africa Report, talking about the situation in Kenya. Do join us for another edition of Top Story at the same time tomorrow morning.